we were one of the very first banks in the entire country to roll out a blockchain-based real-time payments network that we call Tacit Pay. That technology is actually the same technology that Signet or Signature Bank ran. It's the same exact. It's an Ethereum-based blockchain, 24/7 real-time payments. And I had to talk to our regulator about getting this approved. Not in crypto, just blockchain-enabled payments. And I remember when I met with our first regulator, and I tried to explain to them what we were trying to do, and they didn't even understand what we were talking about.
Yeah.
You have to operate within the perimeter. There was no perimeter when I got to the bank. It didn't exist. A couple of banks took some risk, and a lot of those banks we know are not here anymore.
Yeah.
For one reason or another.
I mean, yeah, they got, attacked by the government essentially.
Look, shut down.
I mean, have you seen like a lot of Nick Carter's research and stuff on this?
No, I haven't.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's fascinating. They literally took these people, they took them out. They just took these banks, a lot of these banks some of these banks were completely solvent and they just executed them.
I have heard that there were banks who were, that their capital was solvent and they were basically forced to merge or sell because of reasons that had nothing to do with their tier 1 capital ratios.
Yeah. I mean, these regulators are just making stuff up. I mean, it's luckily the Chevron doctrine got repealed, so Congress has to mandate things.
Yes.
I mean, it's just gotten totally out of control. You've got these swamp creatures just making stuff up. You can only have 15% crypto exposure, and you have to have all of these terrible bonds that the government is printing and selling you. I think that was why one of the first banks went down, because they had all these
First Republic.
And I think what was the other one? It was
SVB.
I guess they had their whole balance sheet was just full of these trash bond loans, I guess, bonds that were paying 1% over 20, 30 years or something crazy. And then, the interest rates went up. So it's those bonds got marked down significantly.
Right. When a bank does a loan or a bank takes in deposits, the bank has to set aside, it has to put money away. Well, it doesn't just put money away at the Federal Reserve. It goes in and buys bonds. It buys treasuries. So to your point, when you're buying a 10-year treasury, but the loan's going to mature in a year, 2, 3 years, that's called a duration mismatch.
Yeah.
Where your bond portfolio and your loan portfolio do not mix. I mean, you have rate volatility, you can get upside down quick. And so that creates a huge capital problem. So it's funny that they're making the banks buy U.S. treasuries, right, to basically capitalize themselves. When everyone here knows that U.S. treasuries are based upon a fiat currency, which could be literally worth zero.
Welcome back to another episode of CypherPunk'd. Today we're joined by Mark Hindley, a former banker, private equity pro, and blockchain advocate. He's currently the CFO of a $200 million plus family office. Mark and I first connected during his time at Cogent Bank, where he worked to bridge the gap between traditional finance and crypto by leading outreach to onboard blockchain and Web3 crypto companies. With all the recent attention on debanking and financial censorship, Mark's perspective couldn't be more relevant. From starting as an English major to serving in the Air National Guard to becoming a trailblazer in finance, Mark's journey is truly one of a kind. Mark, welcome to the show. It's great to have you, bro.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here, man. Thank you.
So, how did you go from an English major? How did you end up in banking? That's kind of
So my banking career actually began in the payday lending industry, which is sort of the scorn of the earth. Before there was crypto in terms of banks, in terms of what banks hate. You think banks hate crypto, they hate payday lenders even more.
That was Chokepoint 1.0. I mean,
right?
We're going to get into
2013
stuff.
Yeah, a long time ago. So I'm in college. I need a job. I see a posting for this payday loan, this national franchise. And at the time I was this is more of a desk job. I was working, crappy college jobs. And so my first job in finance was with this payday lender, literally doing door-to-door collections on $95 payday loans, knocking on people's doors with their animals and their cousins and who knows who came to the door. I had to have an armed security guard with me. And so it was clear that I kind of liked the whole lending finance part, just not so much knocking on strangers' doors. And so I kind of began to get more into the traditional commercial bank world. So once I got out of college, I loved English. I love to communicate and read, and that's kind of a lost art, I think. And, if I have an issue with where we are as a society right now in terms of the English language, it really is X, because a lot of these nuanced ideas require chapters and volumes, and that's not where we're at as a society. So
it's so sad, man, because, it's people just get caught up on a one sentence, title of an article or something.
Yeah.
It's all they know is just they can only be attentive for 1 minute to or 1 second to just read one sentence. And like, that's their whole, there's no nuanced discussion. Sure. I think that's why podcasts are so powerful and emerging as this alternative sort of medium of truth.
Sure. What's interesting is, 20 years ago, whenever you would look at an article, it wouldn't tell you how long it takes to read it. And now it does. You ever notice that? Like 3, 4, 5 minute read.
Yeah.
Well, you would just read it.
Yeah.
So I still love reading, and I love to communicate, and I love the English language. But I also love the nature of finance and how it works. And so that's kind of what launched me into banking. And so I did, the traditional commercial bank type, worked at a branch, managed a branch, then got into the commercial banking aspect. So very, very traditional for about 10 years. And so ended up leaving and then obviously came back later on the crypto part. But, that was kind of the launch of my career per se, was traditional commercial banking.
So you had this awakening moment about Bitcoin when you were working in Haiti with Ray Dalio's foundation. What happened there? What changed your perspective?
Yeah. So for those people that don't know, Ray Dalio runs the world's largest hedge fund. It's called Bridgewater. And Ray is also very philanthropic. So I was working for a nonprofit that was very connected to Ray and his orbit. And Ray wanted to do something pretty different. He wanted to do microfinance lending in the developing world, right? So much of what you hear about nonprofits is just handouts, right? But what would it be like to actually loan a really, really poor person money to plant trees or have some kind of a construction business? And so there's a Nobel laureate called Muhammad Yunus who really pioneered this idea of microfinance, and you can read all about him. I got to meet him. He's an amazing individual. So we took the Yunus model and really tried to figure out how can we make really, really small loans to really, really poor people. So I'm down in Haiti. This is circa this would have been 2013, 2014. And now I got to figure out, okay, I did all the hard work, identifying actual people or businesses who could actually take a loan and might be able to actually pay it back because they have some viable business opportunity. But then I had to figure out, how do you actually get people this money? In the developing world, especially in Haiti, which is, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, the banking system really does not function for anyone that is not in the major city, like Port-au-Prince or Jeremy. So when you're making loans to super poor people who live in very, very rural areas, there literally is no way to get them money other than bringing them physical cash, which is not a good idea in a country like that. So I began to look around for digital forms of currency that existed. This is 13, 14. And what I first found was a thing called Mon Cash, which is basically it was actually owned by the telecom company who operated.
It's the same thing in Africa. I mean,
yes. So the cellular company basically allows you to text money amongst people. The problem is whenever you would actually receive money, you then had to go to a third party to actually get the money out, and you pay exorbitant fees, right? So it's the same model as a Western Union where everyone has their hand in the pie within the peer-to-peer electronic cash system, right? So after I was looking for other solutions, I said, oh my gosh, what's this thing called Bitcoin? Which at this time, this is 2013, this is Silk Road, Mount Gox, the old days. And it was wild.
I'm excited we're going down this route.
We are.
Because when I thought we were going to talk today, we're talking about family offices and private equity and fucking, bank, traditional finance here in America.
Right.
People don't realize that there's billions of people on this planet, and literally half the population of the planet doesn't have access to banking infrastructure, or lives under authoritarian regimes, or lives in violent war zones, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we're talking about 3.5 billion people that literally have no access to exactly what you're describing.
Exactly. And so a lot of these people who rely upon foreign aid, up to Haiti, for example. So how does Haiti get aid? It gets aid in dollars. The U.S. government's not sending Haitian goud, which is their currency. So they send dollars to a Haitian bank who converts it. They take their cut. It goes to someone else. They get their cut, and everyone has their piece of the pie. So my solve for was, how do I get money to people? Really, just this is before I knew about decentralized blockchains and all that. I hadn't been orange pilled. So I discovered Bitcoin as a method to make loans to super, super poor people in rural Haiti.
That's fascinating.
And so that's how I discovered, the whole deal.
Wow. So what led you from there to starting at Cogent Bank and becoming involved in blockchain?
Yeah. So I discovered Bitcoin 2013, 2014. I had the commercial banking background, so now I start to learn about DeFi in terms of like non-intermediary lending, staking, lending against coins. Mm-hmm. And it's just like at the time, again, this is 10 years ago, it was mind-blowing to think about a bankless system, not just in Haiti for poor people, but people like me who want to get leverage but don't want to have to go to a bank and do all this and that and the other, as someone who was in banking almost their entire career. So I began to become obsessed with understanding the nature of how the system actually would work. And then is there a way to actually begin to bridge that to TradFi? Fast forward to, I guess this would have been 2020-ish. Now we're in like DeFi summer, Bitcoin's all-time highs, everyone's feeling good about it. And there's a visionary who runs Cogent Bank who said, we need to figure out a way to bridge DeFi and decentralized blockchains and sort of peer-to-peer currencies into the traditional finance system. At that time, so now we're looking at, and now the year's about 2020, there were a handful of U.S. banks that were even trying to do it. And we all know their names, right? Silvergate, Signature, SVB, Cross River. That was it. There's 7,000 U.S. banks and 4 had some kind of program. And so there had to be another solution for people who either didn't want those banks or wanted a different version of those banks. And so I took a leap of faith, you can almost say, and said, hey, I'm going to try to build a crypto bank or crypto-friendly institution within the confines of an FDIC-regulated traditional state charter commercial bank. I mean, that's what I did, which is how we met.
Yeah, I mean, I do recall that, 4 or 5 years ago, and all of this comes back to me, and having struggled to find good banking relationships and stuff, I was super excited, and like we went to lunch and everything was great, and we had you were putting on some fantastic like brunches and lunches with speakers and talking about tokenized securities. And once you really fully understand how DeFi works and how this permissionless blockchain works, where everything is transparent, you can see all this stuff. It's like it's obvious that this is the future. Like banks, entities, it's already starting. They're coming on chain and they will be using these tools because it's just better. I mean, it just works so much better. It works 24/7. It works around the clock. It happens immediately. Settlement happens immediately.
Right.
There's all these benefits of using blockchains for these things.
Right. So,
this is inevitable, and you really were a pioneer, who saw this stuff well in advance, right? And
I appreciate
now, I mean, but I got to say, you your timing was like immaculate when all this Chokepoint, stuff kicked off. You were like right before it really hit the fan. It was like you got offered a better job, I guess. Was that like just because you got offered a better job, or did you kind of see the writing on the wall with the administration switching, going back to the Biden, Obama administrations? Because like you said, you were in payday lending before, so I'm sure you remember how Chokepoint 1.0 sort of operated,
right? And
then that's a lot of those same swamp creatures who had been essentially went to court and found unconstitutional with Chokepoint 1. I think Marty Gruenberg at the OTC is the one that comes to mind. It's like they were doing all this and the court said, this is completely unconstitutional, cease and desist immediately. And then now the same character is back, the same creature, swamp creature, is back in power. He's got hundreds of sexual harassment stuff, allegations against him and his, but they're in there, cutting off crypto, cutting off all these different things behind the scenes. Right back at it after the court said, no, this is unconstitutional. They basically said, we don't give a fuck. We're going to go back and we're just going to totally try to destroy an industry and really prevent society and progress from moving forward. Which is, what sucks is that all of the stuff you described before, which is, billions of people who don't have access to any infrastructure. I mean, facilitating the collaboration and transfer of these systems and updating of these systems will help the whole world in a lot of ways. So these people, these Chokepoint architects are actually, really through the butterfly effect, really harming people and, businesses, tax revenue. I mean, there's so many off-order effects that you can't even realize when you first think about it. But did you feel like this was coming down the pipe?
Yeah.
So you had kind of like advance. Tell me about this.
I mean, like there's a lot to unpack, right? So I come into the bank at the end of 2021, right? Trying to launch this. We called it blockchain-enabled banking. Order number one was to understand, okay, what is the box that we can play in? And that box is determined by, as all banks, our primary regulator, aka bureaucrats. Right? So the biggest thing that banks fear from a compliance perspective is BSA, OFAC, and compliance, right? And within that, the largest component for banks of BSA, OFAC, and compliance is around KYC, know your customer. As a lot of the crypto projects began to get popular, like particularly around like privacy coins, like Monero as an example, literally that market themselves as untraceable sources of funds or untraceable methods of payment. When those things began to be talked about in the ecosystem of crypto at large, ex-Bitcoin, which, we'll put Bitcoin and crypto in different categories, but crypto at large, those ideas were terrifying. Number one, the system is not built for those kinds of technologies. So when I said, hey, where's the rule book right now? I got literally statutes and rules that were issued by the Office of Foreign Asset Control, the U.S. Treasury, that were 10, 20, 30 years old, that had never envisioned these kinds of technologies. So you're looking at a document that has no concept of what it
just doesn't
means.
make sense.
It doesn't.
It just totally.
So the question becomes like, well, how do you even operate?
Those things are even, in my opinion, those things are even unconstitutional to begin with. I mean, it's like a Orwellian surveillance state. I mean, all this stuff, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
No, that is.
I mean,
I think you have to be mindful, though, that, and this is sort of a common misnomer, getting a bank account is not a right. I think like we sort of take it for granted that we walk into a bank and you open an account, but there is an approval process. What you don't know as John Q. Consumer is that when you put your name and your social security number in, they're getting all kinds of data on you.
I know. Yeah,
all kinds of data.
It's kind of disturbing.
And banks pay a lot of money to a lot of data gathering firms to get information on you. And I don't mean like social address. I mean like all your criminal tax records, whatever they can possibly get their hands on, they're looking at. And
I get an email, I get a letter in the mail probably once a month that says, we're sorry, all of your personal information was hacked and has been exposed. I mean, this is completely crazy. This is insane.
Yeah.
So like if they're trying to like protect people from criminals, it's like they're actually enabling just mass, grandmas getting destroyed, all these grandmas getting destroyed because all their information's all over the dark web. I mean,
it is.
There's no protection for this data. I mean,
correct.
It's like, and on the wall, I mean, I have the Fourth Amendment here. If you read that, I mean, it feels like this is unconstitutional because the government is the one requiring, a lot of these entities to do all these things with these, OFAC and KYC, AML, all these different things.
Exactly.
I mean, it's coming from the government, which is unconstitutional.
It's coming from
it's an unreasonable search and seizure.
Yeah, it's coming from government agencies who are deathly afraid of. Well, let me just back up a couple. So I remember when I met. So our primary regulator, the FDIC office, was in Atlanta. And I remember, and maybe you remember this, we were one of the very first banks in the entire country to roll out a blockchain-based real-time payments network that we call Tacit Pay. That technology is actually the same technology that Signet or Signature Bank ran. It's the same exact. It's an Ethereum-based blockchain, 24/7 real-time payments. And I had to talk to our regulator about getting this approved. Not even crypto, just blockchain-enabled payments. And I remember when I met with our first regulator, and I tried to explain to them what we were trying to do, and they didn't even understand what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that there's an information and knowledge gap, which leads to a fear gap between the regulators and the commercial banks, right? So if you can't understand the movement of funds, you're never going to get comfortable with a bank rolling that out. And that's just literally bank to bank, account to account. When you overlay that sense of fear and paranoia and lack of clarity, which is again why this Trump bump is so powerful for the crypto adjacent equities and even the coins, is everyone talks in the industry. So whether you're an auditor, a regulator, you're a fintech, there's this term called the regulatory perimeter, which basically defines how you have to operate within the perimeter. There was no perimeter when I got to the bank. It didn't exist. A couple of banks took some risk, and a lot of those banks we know are not here anymore.
Yeah.
For one reason or another.
I mean, they got, attacked by the government essentially.
Shut down.
I mean,
right?
Yeah, it was like.
So if you're operating outside the regulatory perimeter, you're not going to be allowed to operate.
Have you seen like a lot of Nick Carter's research and stuff on this?
No, I haven't.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's fascinating. They literally took these people, they took them out. They just took these banks, a lot of these banks some of these banks were completely solvent and they just executed them.
I have heard that there were banks that their capital was solvent and they were basically forced to merge or sell. because of reasons that had nothing to do with their tier 1 capital ratios.
Yeah. I mean, these regulators are just making stuff up. I mean, it's like, luckily the Chevron doctrine got repealed. So, Congress has to mandate things. Yes. I mean, it's just gotten totally out of control. You've got these swamp creatures just making stuff up. Like, you can only have 15% crypto exposure, and you have to have all of these terrible bonds that the government is printing and selling you. Like, I think that was why one of the first banks went down, because they had all these like
First Republic.
And I think what was the other one? It was
SVB.
There might have been one other one. Yeah. That like, I guess they had like their whole balance sheet was just full of these trash bond loans, I guess, bonds that were paying 1%, over like 20, 30 years or something crazy. And like, then, the interest rates went up. So it's like those bonds got marked down like significantly.
Right. So
in value. So
right. So that's what you're talking about. Yeah. So when a bank does a loan, right, or a bank takes in deposits, the bank has to set aside, has to put money away. Well, it doesn't just put money away at the Federal Reserve. It goes in and buys bonds. It buys treasuries. So to your point, when you're buying a 10-year treasury, but the loan's going to mature in a year, 2, 3 years, that's called a duration mismatch. Yeah. Where your bond portfolio and your loan portfolio do not mix. I mean, you have rate volatility, you can get upside down quick. And so that creates a huge capital problem.
Yeah.
So it's funny that, to your point, they're making the banks buy U.S. treasuries, right, to basically capitalize themselves when everyone here knows that U.S. treasuries, based on who you talk to, are based upon a fiat currency, which could be literally worth zero.
Well, yeah, they're literally just, keep printing the money and debasing the current. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you're getting destroyed by inflation, but, even that, the market value of that bond is worth less than what you paid for. I mean, that's crazy to me. It blows my mind.
It is. So, but I think people need to understand that, I don't believe that the people that I worked with, who I talked to, the people who I talked to, I don't think that they intentionally said, I want to shut this down. I think what they said was, well, we don't understand what's going on, and we cannot allow it to occur in the traditional U.S. financial system. Because there simply is no regulatory clarity, at least a couple of years ago, that would allow a traditional bank to operate with a decentralized or, for example, any kind of like centralized exchange. So if you're going to bank a centralized exchange, or someone who's like going to have what's called a money transmitter license, an MTL, which is a whole nother topic of conversation, right? You have to understand who their customers are. So if you want to bank a centralized exchange, you have to know, how do you vet your customers? And so when they're finding out that these exchanges don't even know who's sending them coins or who's staking coins, that cannot be allowed on the current perimeter of the regulations. And so this is why I think this election cycle has been so powerful, because the clarity that will come from the SEC, FDIC, OCC, the OTS, which is less talked about, that will define the perimeter that does not exist today. And that is a massive catalyst, not just for adoption, but for innovation and for technological, to where capital can flow more freely into blockchain, crypto type startups, and they can actually get traditional finance and non-traditional. And that will spur a whole, I think, super cycle of growth over the next, let's say, 2 to 4 years. Okay. So you're saying that the new incoming administration is going to provide a lot of that regulatory perimeter clarity. Is that exactly? Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Have you heard of these? I think it's called like the Privacy Act. I think it's like Mike Lee from Utah and Rick Scott from Florida here. They're proposing a bill that I think it like gets rid of a lot of this bank secrecy legislation, and like it rolls back a lot of this unconstitutional AML regime stuff. Kind of, No, I haven't heard any of it about it. Okay, but it's something recently that I was made aware of by some other human rights activists and stuff that have been debanked and had a lot of issues since they use crypto to help bring money to war-torn areas and stuff. But certain governments have debanked them. But Paul, why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you pull up that clip from Rogan's podcast? I think it's like a 40-second clip here. 1 to 2 minute clip, and just kind of play that so people who are watching can get an idea of what we're talking about here.
This started about 15 years ago with this thing called Operation Chokepoint, where they decided to, as marijuana started to become legal, as prostitution started to become legal, and then guns, which there's always a fight about. Under the Obama administration, they started to debank legal marijuana businesses escort businesses, and then gun shops, just like your gun manufacturers, and just like you're done, you're out of the banking system. And so if you're running a medical marijuana dispensary in 2012, like you, guess what? You're doing your business all in cash because you literally can't get a bank account, you can't get a Visa terminal, you can't process transactions, you can't do payroll, you can't do direct deposit, you can't get insurance. Like none of that stuff is you've been sanctioned, right? None of that stuff is available. And then this administration extended that concept to apply it to tech founders, crypto founders, and then just generally political opponents. So, so that's been like super pernicious.
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, 100%. And this is called, so it's Operation Chokepoint 1.0 was 15 years ago against the pot and the guns. Chokepoint 2.0 is primarily against their political enemies and then to their disfavored tech startups. And it's hit the tech world like we've had like 30 founders debanked in the last 4 years. Yeah. It's been a big recurring path.
30.
This is one of the reasons why we ended up supporting Trump. It's like we can't live in this world. We can't live in a world where somebody starts a company that's a completely legal thing and then they literally like get sanctioned. Right, and embargoed by the United States government through a completely unaccountable, no due process. None of this is written down. There's no rules. There's no court. There's no decision process. There's no appeal. Who do you appeal to, right? Like, who do you go to get your bank account back?
Crazy.
Oh, it's 100% true.
Yeah,
I know.
I've experienced it.
Yeah, I mean, and so have you. And so the fear of the unknown and there was an article on the front page of the Wall Street Journal yesterday. This is the Wall Street Journal, like not exactly like the new form of news media. And the article was called "The War on Crypto Under Trump is Over."
Yeah,
and I think that really permeates not just the exchanges and all that, but really what I was talking about earlier, which is this idea of defining the perimeter and then understanding how BSA, KYC, which are not bad things in of themselves, but they can be wielded as tools to, as Mark said, to be pernicious, which is 100% true. I mean, it was very difficult to bank. I'll give you an example. I had a DAO come to me that needed a bank account, because they were going to pay their developers, they were going to pay a lot of their forum members in U.S. dollars. It took months to get me to be able to get our regulator to understand what a DAO even was. I guarantee you, there's nothing in the regs about a DAO in terms of like being KYC, AM. It doesn't exist. And so this is why it's so important that we get these clear regulations, because that will open up the flow of capital and the flow of banking.
That's wild. I remember because like as soon as you left, I mean, I was like a month's process, like going through with Cogent to try to like onboard, and like, you know, I spent hours, and Kyle spent hours, and our team spent hours, like, you know, providing all the stuff, like doing all the stuff. And I'm like, you know, finally we can have a good relationship with a bank that can understand what we're doing and can help our company grow, hire more people, create more tax revenue, you know, the American dream, right?
Exactly.
And then after you left, it was like, I got silence, crickets, sending emails, no response. And then all of a sudden, I've got, I can't remember her name, but she was higher up and I know she knew you. But it was like, you know, hey, sorry, you know, we can no longer offer you services. And like, it was just like this, some kind of, the tea leaves were like, she had said something like, we told from our higher ups that this is, you know, we got to shut this down, essentially was what I was told. You know, I'll try to find that email and pull it up and print it out.
You know, I loved my time trying to build that. The reality was, you know, right around the time when FTX collapsed, this would have been like in November of 22. People were using the term like crypto winter. Man, that was like going to be a crypto ice age. And I just knew that like after that had happened with Celsius and FTX and, you know, Binance and what was going on there at the time, there wasn't enough inertia within the system internally or externally to move that ball down the field. Clearly now it's different, which is why everything's just been on fire since November the 3rd or 4th. But whoever gets first mover advantage I think is going to win. I think you're still able to get banking. But it has to be a giant pain in the ass all the time. Everyone's always like, what do you do over there? Like, who are your customers?
So what I've what happened was right around that time with Cogent, I was trying to onboard with you guys at Cogent, and I've had, my local credit union sent me an email saying, "Hey, we're shutting down all your accounts," and like I was shocked because I have literally like I had multiple businesses, multiple LLCs, personal accounts, car loans that have been paid off, like long-term relationship with this credit union, like never had a problem, and like their whole motto is like we're based 80% on relationships, like that's their whole thing. So I escalated it all the way to the top. And they, to their credit, they overturned the decision of the people in the compliance departments or whatever, the vice president or president of the credit union said, "You're right. You've had a good relationship, essentially. Right. We're going to stand by our mission statement and we're not going to debank you." But when that happened, I mean, I was shocked because I figured, I took for granted that we live in America and that, legal, I'm paying 6-7 figures in taxes to the government. I figured, hey, they're not going to take my tax dollars and try to fucking kill me and ruin my employees' lives and my family life. And I took that for granted. Yeah. Because I always believed in the exceptionalism and idealism of, the American experiment, right? We're not going to use the banking infrastructure to target our political opponents. But once that happened, I mean, I was like, okay, well, my biggest expenses are like, for mining specifically, is like the power companies or the utilities. I have to make sure they're paid. Sure. So like I scrambled and like applied for tons of different bank accounts all over the place, just trying to find, hey, which banks are, it was like whack-a-mole because the government was trying to kill off, Signature and First Republic and all these other things. And, found a couple different banks to bank me. And I'm honestly even scared to even say them out loud right now because I don't know what this government is going to do in the next 30 to 40, 50 days before Trump's admin comes in, right? So I'm not even going to say their names right now.
Yeah, that's wise.
I don't want them, I don't want to put in any undue scrutiny with, the sexual harasser Marty Gruenberg before he gets out. It does
like there have been some pretty salacious details coming out about the FDIC, which is ironical because like they're supposed to be like the pristine regulatory agency of the banks in this country.
Is he the FTC, the head of the FDIC?
FDIC
or the OTC?
So I don't know his name. What I know is that the FDIC, that organization, has gone through a massive number of really nasty, horrible internal salaciousness of harassment, this, that, and the other. So when you think about that, they're charged with like, it's a scary proposition, right? Yeah. That like now that like they have, but people don't know how much power they really wield as the primary regulator of most commercial banks in this country.
I don't understand where all this power is coming. I mean, like there are so many different. I can't even get the agencies. There's so many different.
There's 450 agencies. There's one. There's more than one agency for every year this country's existed.
I mean, it has been absolutely bananas. I mean, this is great, and they just like making stuff up as they go along, deciding. Elizabeth Warren's, making phone calls and telling Gary Gensler what to do at the SEC. He's like, he's God. I really despise that guy. I mean, like. You watch his blockchain classes when he was at MIT, and then like it's like he says one thing and then literally sells his soul to the devil. And like the second he gets a little bit of power from Elizabeth Warren and she makes that deal with Biden that she's going to stay in to make sure Bernie Sanders doesn't win, and like the whole political thing, she says, "Look, I'm going to be in charge of financial innovation." And it's like I watched this thing where she's sitting there interviewing, I think it was Jamie Dimon and all these bank execs. Like these big bank execs, and like her whole thing was always like, "Oh, I'm here for the little guy," and then like she's sitting there with the bankers, like totally agreeing with everything. They're all like in total agreement about how bad blockchain is and all this stuff. It's like this woman has completely lost the plot. I don't know how she still wins re-election. I mean, she is like the worst.
If you look at her, if you go to her ex profile, she actually says that one of it says like under her name, her little script, it says like mother of XY and then the CFPB. She refers to it like as her child, right?
That is insane.
So there's this concept that people have to be protected from crypto, DeFi, Bitcoin. Like it's this malevolent force that needs to be protected against, and that is a ideological and just sort of political mismatch that doesn't make any sense.
It's like it's like just the infantilizing like the entire society of like. But like, it's okay if you want to go like buy a scratch off at the gas station or like gamble your life savings away or go to a casino. Like those things are all okay.
Exactly.
But if you want to invest in the best performing asset in all of human history, no, we can't have that.
Exactly.
I mean,
let alone go buy it at an ATM machine. That's a whole nother topic, right?
Crazy.
So it is ironical that the CFPB, that the person who was so in favor of that is literally completely antithetical to the liberation of financial services to people who wouldn't otherwise qualify. Quick note, there's a proposal right now that would cap credit card fees at 10%, and that sounds great. The problem with those kinds of ideas, which are championed right now by the progressive left, but also the
populist right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't love that idea.
Exactly, because what happens is people will now become uncredited.
Yeah.
Because if you're a lender, you're not going to lend someone with a 520 credit score at 10%. The risk return does not fit.
It doesn't make sense because a lot of people are going to default on that.
People don't think about these ideas in a nuanced way.
It's very similar to the minimum wage argument, right? Which sounds noble, right? At when you first think about it, it's like, you know what, people should be paid a living wage, blah, blah, blah. But not all jobs deserve to, in my opinion, like, some of these jobs should be for kids, for teenagers, for, people to learn about work, whether, you're flipping burgers at somewhere or you're working at a gas station, whatever it may be. You're not necessarily entitled to have to fund your whole lifestyle with one person in a household off that wage. I think those are jobs, those are stepping stone jobs.
Exactly.
You might live with 3 friends in a condo, each have your own bedroom or whatever. You work that job until you find something better. That's my thought about it. Although it does sound noble, but it ends up having perverse effects, right? And I think that there's so much of that when we talk about capitalism and socialism and communism and all this stuff. Like, the road to hell was paved on the best of intentions sometimes.
True.
And I think Thomas Sowell has a great quote. Like, policies aren't judged by the worst thing for society is when policies aren't judged by their actual results, but by their intentions. Something along those lines. Like the intention may be good, but the outcome is terrible, right? And that happens over and over again.
But everything that you mentioned, right? Fill in the blank, right? Communism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, they all involve intermediaries or the centralization of power or the centralization of information, which is why decentralization and DeFi is so powerful for the globe, because it doesn't involve the very source of what makes all these ideologies fail, which is the spoken hub model. There is no hub. Yeah. And without a hub, there hasn't been an experiment like that ever in mankind's history.
It's just human nature, right? Humans are, when they get in the system of power, they're going to corrupt. I mean, we're all
absolute
human,
power
right?
corrupts, absolutely, right? Of course.
Yeah, those JFK had a famous, those who ride on the back of the tiger often end up inside. It's like, the power just, you start with a good plot, but then eventually you lose the plot, right? And you end up like Elizabeth Warren against the big banks and all this stuff, and then there she is agreeing with all the big makers. It's like you've lost the plot. Right?
Exactly.
It's like you've become what you sought to not become. Now that's what you are now, right? It's like, is it like, if you live long enough, you'll see all of your heroes turn into villains and your villains turn into heroes or something along those lines.
No, that's cool. I like that.
Oh. When you see crypto companies getting systemically cut off from banking, what did that tell you about where we're headed as a society? How do we fix all this?
Yeah. So,
do you think the incoming Trump admin is like, partially the answer? Do you think Doge and what Vivek and Elon are trying to do, the Department of Government Efficiency, and so many hedge fund managers and people that have had such great success in business, they all want to be a part of this and help fix this system? Because I saw a chart the other day. It was like, we talk about all these agencies that shouldn't exist. It's like, 30 to 40% of all like revenue comes from like people working in these departments that shouldn't even exist. It's kind of crazy. It's like, the GDP growth and all this stuff, like most of it's just government printing money, paying their employees, and, taking taxable money from the productive members of society to grow the administrative state, essentially. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, that's a lot there. I think in general, like to the Doge thing, clearly there's tremendous energy around these kinds of ideas, and for good reason, right? There are many, many people who are simply dissatisfied and fed up with the never-ending bureaucracy that grows unchecked year after year after year. I think the challenge is going to be what can actually be accomplished. And what I mean by that is look at what we actually spend money on, right? Medicare, Medicaid defense is the lion's share. And no one's going to cut military spending. Now, what they can cut are these bloated. So you mentioned I was in the International Guard. You have no idea how money is actually spent in the military. So let me tell you, because that was my job, was contracting. So I was the guy who actually spent the money.
Really?
I actually put out the POs and we awarded the business to these contractors. So the process, I'm sure it hasn't changed as I was out, which was 20 years ago, which is even 20 years ago, there was preferential treatment for minority-owned, women-owned. Basically, it was DEI before there was DEI.
Really?
So even if it wasn't the lowest price,
wow,
if you were minority-owned or female-owned, they would pay more to get a job done because they had to fill a certain quota. This is like pre-DEI, like governmental spending 101. The way the allocation process works in the federal government is the House of Reps appropriates funds for the entire year. If you don't spend those funds, you don't get them the following year.
You know what's crazy is that I had some other government contractors in here, we're talking about something, and they were just like, I don't think they even you don't even really, you disassociate, you don't realize it, but like, they were like, yeah, we have $100,000 left over. And like, we were just online trying to buy all this stuff that we don't fucking need.
So literally,
like, what the fuck?
So like 9:30,
ripping off the tax.
9:30 is a fiscal year end, right? And we would say, how much money do we have left? Which is a misnomer. It's how much more can we take until we're called out on it, right? It isn't how much we have left. It's how much can we spend and suckle until we can suckle no more. And we would just spend money on shit that we didn't need.
They were telling me
if we didn't spend
like a $25,000 like cappuccino maker or something crazy. I was like, what the fuck?
Literally. Look,
I mean, that is insane.
I love this country's military. Like, I'm not going to, dog my time there, but what I would say is,
I think there's real energy though for some reform there.
There's tremendous,
and the populace.
There is, and rightfully so, because the amount of waste, I was an infinitesimal piece of that cog, but just what I saw on one military installation 20 years ago, you take that times the entire DOD or all of it, you're talking tens and hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So there's clearly a tremendous amount of fat to be cut.
I mean, there's what's this whole thing with the audit? Like, they've never passed an audit. I mean, that is insane.
Yeah. So, we didn't.
How can they expect taxpayers to, pass, to be able to figure out their taxes and this huge, all these crazy rules and tax code and all this stuff, but like they themselves can't even pass their own audit. Like, it just blows my mind.
So I think what makes that worse is not only are they not good stewards, but then they villainize the wrong people in the process. So that there's a double bad truth. So I work in the high net worth, ultra high net worth private equity world, right, which is all about, to some degree, tax efficiency.
Yeah.
The reality is that the wealthiest people in this country pay the lion's share of the federal income tax.
Yeah.
And about 40% of the U.S. population pays zero.
Oh, yeah.
But gets all the benefits, the roads, the bridges, the hospitals, the military, all of it. There is a fundamental problem with a system which says you're not paying your fair share. That fair share is actually, that's a lie.
Yeah.
And then that burden gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And this side of the equation, their burden doesn't get bigger because it remains at zero.
Yeah.
That is simply not math that works. Period.
It's almost to the point where when you think of like a parasite doesn't kill its host. That's how the parasite survives. But at some point, when a parasite takes too much, right, you get this sort of visceral reaction. And, it's like, to me, it was like, hey, I sent you a 6-7 figure, check of taxes, and you're trying to debank me and kill me. It's like,
exactly,
it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't.
But then you're also vilified.
Developers are fleeing.
But you're also vilified.
The United States.
Right? So you're vilified as an income earner. You're vilified because you're in the crypto industry.
Yeah.
But the politicians say that you're actually the enemy, when in reality you're the only hope that we have.
Yeah.
If we don't have people and corporations and entrepreneurs investing capital and capital is flowing, we have no order.
What makes us better than the rest of the world then? At that point, America isn't really the epicenter of freedom and liberty and progress that America is supposed to be, right? We lose that. So
people talk a lot about this country in terms of, this, that, and the other. So in 2012, at the time, my wife and I, we adopted a child from Colombia, as in South America. She was a teenage girl. Yeah, so I was 30. Mm-hmm. This girl was 17. Uh-huh. And so we had to complete the adoption in Colombia. So we had to go to Colombia, and go through the Colombian court system to actually finalize the adoption.
What prompted this?
It was a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
We literally felt like there was a call in our life to adopt this child that we were connected to through one of our churches. So we literally felt like the plan was we're going to adopt this child. Like, we didn't have any kids. We're like, we're just going to adopt this child, the 17-year-old girl who spoke no English, and I spoke no Spanish. But we're going to adopt this child from Colombia.
Wow.
She spent 6-7 years in in what they call an institution, basically like institutionalized orphanages. Like not good.
Very sad.
So you get down there, and what's interesting about other countries is that their corruption's out in the open. So we had to like get some things done with the courts and with some of the local bureaucrats.
I'd prefer that, honestly.
Literally.
Take the money, take your
they said,
I know what I'm dealing with.
So we go to the court and say, look, I can't do this. But if you just pay this, we can get it done. And they're out of so their corruption
that is so much
is wide open.
Because we all know it's there. And I think that's like what people didn't appreciate. Like, people like, this is what people love about Trump, is that Trump came in and said, like, hey, I'm wealthy. All the things that we think they're doing, they're fucking doing. It's how the system works. The system is like, and people are just like, okay, like, that's refreshing to just hear the fucking honesty.
Literally.
But instead,
when we talked about how we didn't pay tax, people are like, well, yeah, I mean, Hillary, she could have passed the laws to close loopholes, but she didn't. What's it going to do?
Yeah.
Like not use the loopholes he's entitled to using? It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
So what would be beneficial for someone like a Doge is to actually, and this is clearly happening like in its infancy, but it will happen, is the sunlight of day on these handouts and the corruption that exists in other countries. It's open, so you know it.
Yeah.
But there's this idea that we don't have it in this country.
I would just prefer
it's
that.
covert, it's secret. But when all that comes to light, the groundswell, I think, will become unmanageable for those who want to keep the status quo going.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Of course,
one of my favorite quotes. Like, it's like this whole thing with like, did you see the Joe Biden pardon his son? Did you hear about it?
I did see that very recently.
Like, he said he wasn't going to do it.
He did.
You watch all these tweets of all these people. They're like, he's a man of his word. He's going to do this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. It's like, at the end of the day, that's his son. I don't know how I would react if I was in a situation. I'd probably pardon my own son, right? It's like your family, right? It's like, as fucked up as it is, he's a crackhead and he did all this crazy shit. He was obviously guilty of many different things, but, Biden's on his way out. Yeah. That's his fame. That's his blood. I don't even fault him for it. I almost feel better about him as a human that he's, infallible and that did that. But, let's not pretend that your shit doesn't stink. I mean, that's what these fuckers, that's what they've been doing for so long. Elizabeth Warren's, all these people. It's like, we know what Trump is. We can very clearly see he's a flawed in many ways, right? He's not perfect, but, his family loves him and the people love him. Or a lot of people do, right? It's like nobody's fucking perfect, right?
Yeah, but what's so ironical about Trump is that all the things he's called, Hitler, the Antichrist.
You can't even take this stuff. I mean, it's just so absurd.
Think about, I'm not aware of any indictment on any of his kids.
He's raised great kids. He's got a great family. Very successful.
Has remained, to my knowledge, relatively scandal-free.
Loyal, exactly. Productive members of society.
So if Hitler can raise kids like that, then I guess I also want to be Hitler.
Yeah, no, it's just
if I can raise my kids like that as well.
It's disgusting what they're polling and what they're doing. I mean, it's like it's actually extremely. It minimizes the terror and the terrible things that Hitler did to people who still have living relatives who went through the Holocaust.
That's true. It really does.
These people need to be called out. They need to be. I mean, this is unacceptable. And I think U.S. people's trust in media is at like 14%, 12%.
Completely.
I mean, it's like nobody believes anything they're saying.
Yeah.
A lot of these entities are probably going to go out of business, which is a good thing.
I think. The pollsters, the opinion writers.
I mean, it was very obvious the pollsters were completely wrong. They've been wrong for the past 20 years.
Except for the betting markets, right?
Yeah, the betting markets. That's crypto. This is crypto too.
Right, and this is what's so critical.
Poly market.
That people need to understand is that the best way to predict outcomes is through a disparate group of market participants.
Yeah. Money doesn't lie.
Literally.
It literally will, people put their money where their mouth is.
Know this, right? There's a theory called efficient
markets, or
the efficient market hypothesis.
That's what it is, yeah.
Which everything that is known is known, and the price is the price because of that.
Well,
right?
This is like kind of the foundation of Austrian economics. So
exactly,
so if you really looked at,
but if you looked at the market or any of the contract sites, right, Kalshi or like Robinhood who got late to the game, they never had Harris ahead ever. Maybe it was 52,
Poly market
48.
flipped for a while,
Of,
but then went back down.
But that was months ago.
Yeah,
months in the weeks leading up, when Harris was breaking away.
Yeah.
Because the market is the great equilibrium of all the ideology, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but what's, and I'd be curious to get your take on this too, to go off topic. Is it good for everything in society to be able to become a bettable outcome?
I mean, I'm a degenerate gambler, so I think so.
Right. But does that become, at what point does that become ripe to become like a fait accompli, right? In other words, if there's an event with two potential outcomes and participants are betting on it and money begins to flow, how does it not ultimately dictate the actual outcome? Because we're driven by those kinds of events.
It's definitely a factor, but I've seen some of these betting markets, fluctuate, based on new information comes in, it gets priced into the outcome. And then, one outcome's at 30%, and then a week later, more information comes in and it gets repriced in, and now it's at 40%. So I've seen new information be taken in, and the money that people are betting, it reflects that in the market. You can see that on Polymarket. There's odds of different candidates as, say a news report comes out and more information is for somebody on something posted on Twitter, a video of somebody doing something, and it factors in real time. I think it's fascinating. And even if you go to a poll and there was, it just shows the odds, right? So when something is a 30% chance to happen, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It means that it's only going to happen 3 out of 10 times roughly, right? And I think we saw that with Polymarket. There were outcomes that were 20, 30, 10%. And they won. People that put their money on that 10% outcome, 20% outcome, got paid out.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think it's a factor. It lets you cut through all the bullshit. It takes away. I can't remember I think her name was like Ann Selzer or whatever. She did this Iowa poll.
Iowa poll.
She should be fucking ashamed of herself.
Agreed.
That was so obviously, politically motivated, and all of the Democratic operatives, I think, knew about it ahead of time. Because you found out people were posting on X like, hey, J.B. Pritzker in Chicago, Illinois was at a private fundraiser and he said, don't worry, Seltzer's poll's coming out. We're going to win this or whatever. Right? Yeah. They still think they can manipulate and gaslight and do all these things, and the markets are telling them a very different thing. So it's refreshing to see their bullshit. I spent, a year arguing with one of my buddies who just believes everything from the media. It's like we just have friendly banter. And like he's looking at all these polls and shows me Seltzer's poll. I'm like, this is just like so ridiculous. I was like, I got a bridge I'm going to sell you in Iowa if you believe this.
Literally,
it's like, this is so obviously absurd. And if you look at the pollsters who got it right last time and the right time before that, like Rasmussen and Atlas Intel and Trafalgar, they were historically more accurate. And you got all these NBC News poll, all the biased propaganda pollsters, and like they've been wrong the last like 4 election cycles. So it's like, they have no credibility. Whether they're doing it intentionally or not, it doesn't really matter. They're historically inaccurate. Yeah. And they historically always overestimate one side of the aisle.
But I think
it's like crazy.
To me, it's almost a fool's errand. Like I'll give you an example. There were some amendments in Florida on the ballot, and I thought I knew how I was going to vote going in. I'm like, I'm voting this way. And I'll be honest,
I felt the same way.
I changed.
I did too.
When I was in that booth, I did not vote how I thought I was going to vote.
Yeah.
I read the amendment. So if I was polled, and I think that human nature can never be actually polled in. And so I think they are inherently, it's a fool's errand. I'm sure there were lots of people who probably were legit, never thought they could vote for Trump. But once they got in the booth, they're like,
like they take that into account though.
I can do this.
Like, did you hear here's the huge whale on Polymarket, this French guy?
Yeah.
Did you know how he took that into account? Like they actually controlled for some of those things. Like
they do.
So what he hired his own pollster group, and they did like the neighbor effect. Like, instead of asking people, who are you going to vote for? They said, who's your neighbor voting for?
Yeah. And like those, I think the challenge with the markets is you're buying contracts. So you have to have a seller. And see, that's where it gets interesting is if I'm going to buy a contract that pays me 53 cents on the dollar for a Trump win, someone has to sell me that contract and take the 47-cent risk on the other side of that trade. And that's where I think enough money flowing in could manipulate the outcome, because it's contracts. You have to have a seller taking the other side of that transaction, that risk.
You can stage.
And that's purely financial.
You can stage your. Again, I was buying Kamala at 30%. Like
as a hedge.
Yeah, I mean, 30%.
Well, buy 2 of those for every 1 Trump. I mean, you're basically hedging yourself.
That's what I'm saying. And then when Trump goes back, you know what I mean? Like that's when Trump's at 70%, 80%. That's not a good buy. It's not good value. I mean, I think he's going to win, but it's still not good value, right?
Agreed.
So like when Trump dropped into the 40s, I'm like, this is a great bet. Like you get Kamala in the 30s and Trump in the 40s. I mean,
actually, you saw this. So
that's what smart money does.
So the FTI raided the CEO of Polymarket.
Insane.
And
these fuckers are so out of control.
I don't know. But when I first learned a few months ago that Polymarket wasn't authorized to do business in the U.S., I thought to myself, he's going to get busted. If nothing else, because these again, the same people who would not tolerate a blockchain-based payment network are never going to allow offshore betting in the U.S. on contracts. He's gonna end up getting in trouble, and I'm like, yep, of course that was going to happen. Of course.
But then Kalshi won the lawsuit against them, and the judges said this is totally legal, or they're allowed to do this.
So like they're authorized.
But then afterwards,
so picking winners and losers.
I mean, it's just crazy.
Picking winners and losers.
This has got to stop. This is America. This is ridiculous. Let people do whatever the fuck they want. I mean, as long as they're not harming somebody else, this is just insane.
Agreed.
This is still happening. And these people, they're not on the right side of history who are participating in this and doing this and being part of this.
That is true.
It's like. You can't make the argument, I'm just doing my job. It's like, if Hitler told you to go put people in the gas chamber, what are you going to say? I'm just doing my job.
Exactly.
Stand up. This is unjust. It's like when all these assholes in New York went and killed that guy's pet, his little squirrel and his raccoon. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? You are evil. I mean, if you participated in that, you have lost the plot. I would have resigned instantly. You have that is totally unacceptable. Totally crazy. I couldn't imagine. I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't sleep at night if I was one of those agents who was with those other people busting into some dude's house to kill his pets. I mean, that's just like, hey guys, what the fuck are we doing? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I would quit on the spot.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. God. So let's go back to your story. Tell me, you adopted this 17-year-old girl from Colombia with your wife.
Yes. So she's now 27 years old, has her own husband, and she has her own 2 kids. I'm actually a grandpa.
Oh wow!
I became a grandpa at 39 years old.
That's awesome.
So it's a cool story. But it really, when you spend time, this is one of the most misunderstood thing about people who have only lived primarily in this country and have never gone to like developing worlds. Yeah. So I've been to Haiti. I spent significant time there, time in Colombia. All the things that disgust us in this country, right? We still have incredible access. And so these developing nations, which is the bulk of the world's population, as information begins to flow more freely and we're all more connected, their needs for banking and finance, there's only one hope for those people. And it's not like the large mega, what's called GSIV banks that exist in this country. There has to be a better solution.
I mean, it's generate a cryptographically secure wallet on your cell phone without anybody's permission. I mean, that is the answer.
Exactly. So, I think so much is talked about like these currency debasements and this, that, and the other. And you read it, right? Turkey, Venezuela, African countries.
Of course.
The Israeli
it's inevitable.
type.
Even here, I mean, we've got 50-year level high levels of inflation, right? They printed all this money during COVID,
Sure, and the prices keep going. I think there is going to come a time for sure when there's going to be a global currency reckoning. Like you probably read like BRIC, these like the new group of Russia.
Yeah,
they want to form their own sort of like currency. But what's interesting is now they're talking about using Bitcoin because the dollar is the global reserve currency. Oil is bought in dollars. Bitcoin's bought in dollars. Treasuries are bought in dollars. Exports done in dollars.
Yeah.
When dollar begins to destabilize or other countries want to get around the dollar, what are they going to do? They're going to have to go to Bitcoin. It's the only other the supreme viable option.
I think it's just this global treasury reserve asset for the world. That's the way I see it. It's got this aspect of digital gold based on its fundamentals and its absolute scarcity. So,
sure, absolutely.
In my mind, I save in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is like my savings account. That's kind of how I think about it. Now, can I send it? Can I use it? Yeah. But do I like to spend it? No, I'd rather spend dollars where they're printing it and getting debased. So
I think that's the great, like that's one of the great rubs right now in the ecosystem is if you're supposed to never sell it, then how does it ever become an actual currency? Who controls the currency? How does that actually look when there's I mean, the average volume of Bitcoin traded right now is between $200 and $400 billion a day. What happens when it's $2 trillion a day in volume on the blockchain? Like, how does it even support that? So those are questions that I think will have to be looked at.
Banks, nation states, companies, they're going to pay more for that block space. I just don't see, Bitcoin was invented as like this digital cash was an aspect of it, but on that base layer, I just don't see that scalability possible there.
It's not. We're still on small block size.
Yeah,
we're still on a 10 minutes for a transfer.
With Lightning and all this other stuff, you can scale it and spend it that way. But, to me, Bitcoin is more of a digital, kind of like a digital gold. And I love the uncensorability aspect of it. And, for high value transactions, it absolutely makes sense. And I think that's what eventually is that block space is going to be demanded by extremely high value transaction. Those fees are going to be paid on high value transactions. And I think there's room for this concept of Gresham's law, right? Like, I think it's like bad money drives out the good. Like, people want to spend their bad money first. They don't want to spend the good money. And I think, just realistically looking at it, Bitcoin is this good money that, this digital gold, this savings account, you can spend it if you need it. But I see Bitcoin as this underlying global treasury reserve asset, kind of like gold. And I think it's going to overtake gold eventually. I think it's inevitable. It just has better monetary characteristics. Let's talk a little bit about tariffs as a tool for economic policy. Let's talk about BRICS, the US dollar, Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on Trump's plan with tariffs?
Yeah. So I think, number one, in reality, there is mixed economic literature around the effectiveness of tariffs. You can find data to support either opinion that you want. Clearly, under the last Trump term, when there was tariffs, we did not have inflation anywhere near what we had today. So the idea that he'll do it again and it'll cause us massive inflation, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. There is some data to suggest that there's going to be some pass through to consumers, but growth and other factors typically can offset those kinds of issues. And so I'd say the actual economic impact is going to be mixed based upon how and why. The greater issue, I think, is it an effective negotiating tool? And the answer, of course, is going to be yes.
I think so, too.
Clearly. Like, Trump's written 15, 20 books, The Art of the Deal and all that. It's about leveraging the conversation. You come in maximum out, guns blazing, which is what we need, right?
Yeah.
No, every month, trade deficit numbers are released in this country, all the trade data, and there's massive deficits, right? So anything that we can do to balance the playing field and create leverage in our system is going to be good for U.S. consumers, I think.
My understanding is we have all the leverage. I mean, like,
of course we do.
They're buying it. We are the
richest economy in the world, and so everybody wants to be in this market.
I mean,
right?
When you go into like worst case scenario, it's like they put 100% tariffs on us. We put 100% tariffs on them. It's like it's going to affect them way more because they're operating in our market. The majority of they're selling us in our market. So
a lot of people don't know, but there's also like certain things can be exempted. So there's always going to be like exemptions from tariffs. So if you say, hey, I'm putting a 100% tariff on steel. Yeah. Well, companies and certain like gauges or types of steel can actually be exempted. And so that's the fine print that like no one like really digs into. But I'd say generally, all you have to do is look at what Trump's first term did when there were tariffs, and there certainly wasn't inflation beyond what the Fed or other agencies going to control.
Well, we got a lot of concessions. I mean, he renegotiated trade deals. I think it was NAFTA. There was countries dropped tariffs on our goods, on our, I think for our farmers, especially with China. Are you familiar with Howard Lutnick?
Yes.
His transition team.
Yes.
I think he's
Kenner Fitzgerald. Yeah, absolutely.
Man, I watched his podcast with him and Pomp. Have you seen that?
Not with Pomp, no.
Oh, man, it's a fantastic watch.
Only podcast I watch is yours.
That's the right answer.
Truly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So they had a great episode, a great podcast talking about tariffs. And like, I think in an ideal world, the ideal scenario is 0% tariffs for everybody. There's no tariffs, right? But we don't live in an ideal world. Yeah. And, the libertarian in me loves that idea of the philosophy of like just everybody, 0% for everybody.
Sure.
But the difference is like, it's not 0%. They've got like, if we look at our allies in Europe, it's like, after World War II, we wanted to rebuild their economies. We let them put 100% tariffs on cars and all these different things to help them, rebuild their manufacturing base and, recover from World War II, especially in places like Germany. And today, we still can't sell our cars in their markets without like 100% tariff. I mean, that is like kind of wild. It's like, hey, why is this still in existence? You've rebuilt your economy. Everything is running smoothly. Like, why are you unfairly tariffing our goods? Right?
Yeah, because but their real challenge is their input costs, right? So who's the largest EV maker in the world? It's not Tesla. It's something called BYD out of China. They're the largest EV maker in the world, and they can make an EV for like $25,000. Why? Because they pay their workers $1 a day or $1 an hour.
Yeah.
Well, we have the UAW in this country, who just, I mean, so we can't compete from an input cost perspective, right? So we're always going to be at somewhat of a disadvantage in terms of input costs. But to level it, you kind of have to use tariffs because we can't make an EV for $25,000 in this country. No one can make that work.
I know Elon's trying.
Period.
He's trying to make it happen with the Tesla, but he's also, I mean, we don't even necessarily have to compete on the low end. We could compete on the high end, but like, for example, if we want to sell something, and this is my understanding, if we want to sell, a car, we want to sell one of our American-made cars in Germany, for example, it's like, it's tariffed at 100%, but like they can sell their Mercedes-Benz and all their cars to us at like, we don't charge them anything for that, right?
Sure.
So the ideal scenario is they charge us a 0% tariff, and then our domestic manufacturers can sell their cars on their markets, and they'll still buy Mercedes and they'll still buy all of the stuff that Germany's making there, but they'll have an option. They'll have a choice. They'll start to buy some Mustangs and some American-made cars, right? And kind of balance that relationship out.
Yeah, I think where it gets tricky though, like in autos, is so much of what you buy, even foreign brands, are actually assembled in this country.
Oh, really?
I mean, Toyota, Mercedes, they all have plants like North Carolina and Alabama and Georgia. There's huge foreign automotive plants. Volkswagen has a huge factory in the Southeast. So that's where I think it's tricky because you've got foreign brands with U.S.-made UAW labor producing vehicles. I think on a direct import, though, where it physically comes from another country, that's a different story. What I don't want to do is shut down factories in this country because they fall under some tariff situation.
Yeah. I think that's the argument, though. Like if we can get them to drop some of their tariffs, then we can export some more of our cars and more of our goods, which is more money for our domestic manufacturers. And ideally, we don't we let them produce what they want to produce too, and we don't tariff their goods, like kind of what we've done with China. For most of the
your dad's Republican Party would hate tariffs. They were all free traders, like NAFTA, like the Ross Perot types. Like they were all about that. So I think there is
I like the idea of free trade, but it's
of course, but again, like
it's not free when you've got a gun to my hand.
No, it's not, and that's one of those things where where certain ideas are just always better in
a textbook.
Yes, than they are in reality.
Yeah.
Right. Because again, the input costs will never be level, period.
I like the nuance, the nuance of that, right? Like I personally think it's a great idea to, when we're getting taken advantage of as a country, to use that as a tool, a peaceful, tool to say, hey, you're unfairly taking advantage of us over here. We're going to take advantage of you here, but we're willing not to do that if you just drop those tariffs over here on us. I think that, or hey, stop the 500,000 tons of fentanyl coming through our border and the 20 million illegal criminals, et cetera. 500,000 or something crazy, like people from prisons and criminals and violent offenders that have come into our country over the past 4 years, right? So if you just stop all that, we'll let you keep selling and not put massive tariffs on you. I mean,
I think the bottom line is we have, we use the term in private equity called levers, right? Like you buy like what levers can you pull to increase margin or decrease OpEx, basically increase profitability. The U.S. has tremendous levers that we're not pulling all of our levers. Yeah. And I think the administration that's coming in is going to pull all the levers. And I think that's good for everybody.
I agree.
Not to get wonky, but if you look at, you can buy inflation contracts 1 year out in the market. I'm sorry, 1 year out. If you look at the 1 year inflation contract, it's actually about 3.5%. So the market is pricing in some inflation.
It's a very small
amount. The question is going to be like, how much can we tolerate as a market and as a consumer? Are we okay with 3.5%? Because typically, if we want the 2-year treasury, which is typically in line with the Fed funds rate, to be in lockstep, then that inflation rate will distort the treasury market, which will distort the Fed funds rate. And so there could be some unforeseen consequences of some mild inflation. So I think we have to keep that, in mind when we consider any increase in consumer prices, because 2/3 of the U.S. economy is consumer spending, period.
It's interesting. So if inflation's been, at 50-year record highs, like for the past century, like we've been right up there for the past, and that's the metrics that they themselves use, right? Like the CPI, because they keep changing the statistics and inputs and stuff like that. Revisions, yeah. Every revision makes them look worse after the fact. It's just kind of wild. I mean, it's like, this is ridiculous. They're obviously fudging the numbers, but, would it be so bad? I mean, would the benefits outweigh the costs? I mean, because I feel like inflation's been at 3-something%, for the past 4 years almost. So Like if it's been coming down slightly according to them. I mean, who knows if that's true?
Well, it's a rate of change, right?
Yeah.
So people typically confuse price levels with inflation levels. So people say, oh, inflation's 2%. Well, if price levels are up 50% and it's 2%, then you're still paying 50% more. You're just paying 50% within a much, much smaller, like delta over that. So I don't think anyone in the government can control price levels, nor do we want that. We don't want price controls from the government on anything, period.
Yeah.
Credit card fees, milk, whatever it is. We don't want price controls because they never work. Look at Venezuela, who tried that. It always ends in disaster. But I do think that we have to be prepared for prolonged periods of elevated price levels in these bull economies, because the American consumer has an insatiable demand to buy. Whether they, if they feel like they will have a job tomorrow, they will keep spending. We're at record debt on consumer credit cards. That machine, it continues to be fed. And so I think at some point there's going to have to be a reckoning for that, like austerity. It's just inevitable in this country.
So when you say austerity, do you mean like austerity in the government, like stop spending, or do you mean austerity just with people?
All the above, like draconian. The prevailing idea is if you can grow your way out of these deficits, right? You can use the Treasury yields and Fed funds to every 50 bips that the Fed cuts their rate is a massive help to the deficit because it lowers our overall interest costs on the Treasuries.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So there's incentive to lower rates. Lowering rates is stimulative. Lower rates also can create inflation. Too many dollars chasing too few goods, which is why the Fed's job is like a fool's errand, right? They have blunt tools, blunt instruments. They have Fed funds and they have mortgage-backed securities on the balance sheet, and that's it. You can't change the price of milk by, elevating the Fed funds rate or buying and selling mortgage-backed securities on your balance sheet. So I think we as a society have to decide at what point will we accept some level of austerity in the economy. And what's that going to look like? Again, the problem is, to go back to our Doge conversation, how do you do austerity when 2/3 of the budget no one wants to touch politically? Neither party, no candidate. No candidate will run on, I'll cut DOD spending and I'll cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. They're not going to do it. So we're in this death loop until it blows up, or someone actually has the courage to say, guys, we're going to have to. Here's an idea. When there's a guy there's a guy named Brad Gerstner who runs a hedge fund in California called Alternative Capital. He has this idea where when every child in this country is born, you put X amount of money into the S&P 500, and they can't touch until they're 65 years old. You have 65 years of market appreciation.
Yeah,
you would not need Social Security.
You wouldn't need it
at all.
No doubt.
But whether it's crypto banking, the fear and the unknown of that is unpalatable. But I think, again, how do you get the right price? You have disparate market participants. And so I would rather see the government take money, put it into someone's account on the day of their birth, and they can't touch it for 65 years. And then they get some portion or all of it much, much, much later. The idea that wouldn't grow to more than what they're going to need is ridiculous. So we're going to need market-based solutions at some point in time.
Completely. I mean, it's like a sovereign wealth fund, or what was it, like a nation state, or what do the Saudis do? They do something like this where they have like a sovereign. Is it a sovereign wealth fund?
Well, as I understand, they basically like give money to all their citizens because they have so much of it.
That's what I'm saying. But it's because they're investing it. Like it's a fund. I mean, it's like oil, commodities, stocks, investments.
Yes,
it's run like a business.
It's like a distribution to all the shareholders that are like the citizens.
Yeah.
Which is some people would say like this. Is like UBI.
Yeah.
Which you're probably not a fan of, by the way. At all.
I mean, I'm not a fan of UBI because of. I was open-minded to it, and I looked at the recent test study they did in California, where like what they found was like after like a year, the people who got it were like no better off than they were the year before. They just become like almost entitled to it, and like it just didn't improve their life at all. I think that was like the result of the study.
Yeah. So one of the things that you learned in Haiti, which you can apply here, is it's called the propensity to spend idea, right? Those who receive money who are the highest propensity to spend it will never actually save it.
Yeah.
Which just speaks to our whole country, the whole idea about like the biggest reason in this country why poor people stay poor is because they never have any assets.
Yeah.
They don't own real estate, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, crypto. They own nothing.
Yeah.
And they're reliant upon only income, either earned or unearned, for their entire life. Or other people who work, who buy appreciating assets, that's how you actually create non-governmental, sustainable amounts of wealth, right? So you'll never be able to solve poverty by giving people money.
Yeah.
Because those at the bottom of the food chain are the highest likely to spend it on what? in the census of life. So how do you actually create and cure poverty? You have to use the cap. So going back to my Haiti story, if you give someone a loan and they have to repay it, not only are they more engaged in the process, but they're making a profit because they're actually using that capital to buy assets, like buy trees or make jewelry or buy furniture or whatever it was they were doing at the time. So these UBI ideas are perpetuations of the poverty cycle. Until people own assets or are empowered to generate income producing ideas or assets, you'll never solve poverty, which is also, by the way, why I hate USAID, which is the government's arm of like foreign aid. I'll give you one example. If rice farmers in this country, or corn farmers, as you know, we subsidize farmers in this country to produce crops. And when there's more crops than what we need, we don't burn those crops. You know what we do? We lay them off to poor countries. So if you're a farmer and you're working in a poor country like Haiti and you want to grow corn or you want to grow rice, but the U.S. government is dropping tons and tons of rice at the port for free as humanitarian aid, you're now out of the market. There is no market for that product. So again, it's this whole idea of these UBI handouts. They're needed, but until you create assets or wealth generating ideas, the cycle will never ever discontinue. Period.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're just running on a treadmill. And
we have been since the New Deal.
Yeah.
So go back to Teddy Roosevelt's New Deal was like Social Security. These are not bad ideas. Like they're not like we need social safety nets in this country. But the poverty cycle cannot be broken until people have the ability to have income generating ideas or income generating assets, period.
Yeah. Especially when they keep debasing the money. Even if you save just the money itself, you're losing purchasing power over time.
Exactly.
So it incentivizes spending the money quickly, because you don't want to lose
purchasing power. To spend. Yeah.
It's like the fiat cycle.
It is. Over and over.
Yeah. Assets appreciate because they're debasing the money. So it's wild, right? And Bitcoin is like freedom from this in a lot of ways. Your purchasing power is like going up over time in a way. At least right now, it's going up 50% a year. Historically, it's gone up 50% a year. 60% a year if you've held Bitcoin, over time, because Bitcoin still, I think it's like 1% market penetration. It's still a super small asset class when it comes to
zero
to asset class.
So
in the world,
right? I'm in the family office space, right? And we're with one of the large global wealth advisors, and every year they put a study out of family office wealth and where it is. Do you know what crypto holdings was at large across the entire family office space globally?
Got to be pretty low, 1%, 5%?
Like 0.10%.
Oh, wow.
Like that's what people misunderstand is right now we're at what, 2 trillion in market cap?
Yeah, it's very small.
Give or take, of just Bitcoin. The percentage of the global market cap that is going to have to be allocated is so massive. The math just lends itself. That's how you get to these super high valuations, right?
I mean, I think even if like 5%,
it's just a matter of allocation.
Crypto, it's going to be like $100 trillion asset class or $50 trillion.
It's just the math. It's just simple.
Yeah, and then every year, the overall value of society. So like 10 to 20 years from now, there's going to be trillions of more economic value that's been created. So, or printed. That's going to be
or both, unfortunately.
Probably both, yeah. So you've done over, 100 million in private equity deals. When you look at blockchain tech through that lens, what opportunities are people missing here? Yeah,
it's really hard because private equity is unlike venture capital, right? So a lot of like your crypto firms are all VC backed. Well, what's VC for those that don't? VC is pure. It's shots in the dark, right? You take 20 shots, maybe you hit one.
Yeah, high risk, high reward.
Private equity is very different. Private equity is based upon the predictability of future cash flows. So you better have a good idea that shows a roadmap to potential cash flows. Otherwise, you're just a VC project or a SPAC or some speculative IPO. Don't make any money. Private equity is really based upon taking something that already makes money or can make money and making it that much better and being super greedy about it, unfortunately, in most cases.
So I know, you were here a couple of weeks ago and we were brainstorming about, our curated mining stuff that we're doing internally, where we're setting up these LLCs, and we talked about a fund.
Yeah.
That's a considered risky industry, right? Crypto, but it is spitting out monthly cash flows.
Exactly.
Is that a good thing? Is that like, something like, hey, like we deploy these miners, it might take 2 or 3 months to get them up, but once they're running, it's like they're producing cash flow.
Exactly. So the question is, how do you value that cash flow, right? So you can look at some of the publicly traded miners, Marathon, Hut, all the major ones, and they all have, pretty high valuations based upon either their earnings or their revenue. The question for you would be, or the question for anyone would be, how do I want to value those earnings? Private equity transactions are based upon multiples of something, multiples of revenue, multiples of EBITDA typically. So you have to have a baseline of what is our actual profitability. And then what makes private equity firms successful is how they value the risk with the deal. How do you price? Price is a reflection of certainty or on future of cash flows. If I feel super good about it, you get a high valuation. If I feel bad, you get a low. It's basic, right? Yeah. So the question becomes, as you build a track record and as you show projects are sustainably over time, that will demand a higher valuation. So if you want to have someone take you out, then you can get, a significant return on your money. But you would need some kind of a pretty good track record of performance. And even though Bitcoin's volatile, we know that miners can make money even in volatile markets. Yeah. But people, when they hear Bitcoin mining, they're going to say, well, why won't I just buy like a publicly traded miner? Because you're not going to make what you're going to make.
Of course. I mean, you're not going to.
But you're also not going to have the risk.
They're not going to give you
either.
They're not going to give you a monthly distribution of the profits.
No, actually, you'll get nothing. Exactly. The value, and then you'll pay long-term capital gains on your gains, and then or your tax law is harvested if it goes in the pooper.
Interesting. 5 years from now, what's something in crypto? Where do you see things heading in Web3, blockchain, crypto, Bitcoin? What's something everybody's sleeping on? What should we be paying attention to? How do you? I mean, because you were so, it was like you jumped off the ship at the perfect time, right before the Biden admin came in. It was like, I wish I would have.
Nostradamus moment.
It was like, it was like a Nostradamus thing, and so you had a pretty good foresight when it came to all this stuff. And at the time, I was like, I was wet behind the ears, and I didn't expect it. I was like, I'm still wet behind the ears, but I'm learning as time goes on.
So I think the next 5 years, and we've talked about this, it's going to be the evolution of what I call the Bitcoin industrial complex, which has four pillars. One, crypto curious, Bitcoin curious into actual holders, hodlers. What does that look like? And what's the catalyst? We know there's hundreds of millions of people who have it, but there's 8 billion people on Earth. So what's the catalyst? Is it a better app? Is it an easier on-ramp? Is it banks who can hold and custody it? We'll see. That's kind of like the first. Crypto curious is kind of like the first pillar. Then you have your crypto tourists, like your traders, right? We now know that there are futures, swaps, forwards, options on futures, options on ETFs. Wall Street loves to invent exotic products. And so how that ecosystem evolves and what that does to volatility, I think the next 5 years will be fascinating. Pillar 3 would be the Bitcoin maximalists, which I think actually are becoming an endangered species. And they're all moving to the fourth pillar, which is the Bitcoin capitalists. So, for example, everyone likes to talk about certain publicly traded companies who are doing large Bitcoin buys. And what they don't realize, what's misunderstood, is these companies are taking on massive leverage and they're paying nothing for it to acquire more Bitcoin.
Can you unpack that a little bit, like with the MicroStrategy? I see so much like on X, I'm just watching people.
Here's what's happening.
Left and right.
So Bitcoin has now become a piece of what we call the capital stack, right? So there's two forms of capital, equity and debt. Equity is like, think of equity as like, let's think of it like as money in the bank, and think of debt as, of course, what it sounds like, debt. So what these companies can do, particularly the ones that are publicly traded, is they can issue a piece of debt, a loan, basically, and says, you're going to loan me money, but I'm going to pay you nothing for that money. And we're all supposed to hate the days of free money, but these publicly traded companies can actually borrow money at zero because the bond or the note has a 0% coupon. So you give me $1 million, I give you nothing. All you get is the right to convert what I gave you to my stock when it hits a certain price in the future. And that's all you get. That's the definition of a convertible note. It's a zero coupon convertible note. So you're taking free money, you're buying Bitcoin to hold on your balance sheet as an asset. The idea that because you hold the Bitcoin, and that will improve your enterprise value, that will increase your stock price, that allows you to then return that money to the bondholder when they exercise it at a certain stock price.
So does that mean when they get their money back, do they get more than what they lent out in stock?
Yes.
Okay.
Because what happens is, so I issue you the IOU today, and let's say my stock is $100, and it's for 5 years. So let's just say easy math. Anytime in the next 5 years when my stock hits $155, you can convert that to my shares, liquidate, and make 55% profit on it.
Okay. Interesting.
So we're talking about leverage plays.
Do they have to liquidate immediately
stock
if they do it? Or
so it depends on how the notice is written. But typically the bondholder would have the right to exercise at that price. So they say, hey, hit the price. I'm getting nothing on my money.
Yeah.
So when it hits the strike price, I'm going to want to exercise that and then get my profit and get the heck out.
Okay.
So what you have is you have billions of dollars flowing into the system all through the traditional rails, SEC regulated, exchange regulated, public entities who were owned by hedge funds and Blackstones, who were leveraging free money to buy Bitcoin that the holder of the note will never actually own. All they own is the right to buy a stock at a future price. That is the Bitcoin industrial complex.
Oh, it's wild.
These people will never own any Bitcoin, and they don't even care about Bitcoin. They care about the stock price of a Bitcoin proxy hitting a certain value. What's interesting is if you look right now at X company, you mentioned them. Mm-hmm. So you can calculate based upon their holdings what they should be worth. The challenge that the market has,
the NAV, the net asset value.
So it'd be the market. So the market cap. So you take the value of their holdings, you apply a multiple to the earnings, you get a market cap. What's interesting is if you look at where their stock is, it's actually valuing their Bitcoin at over $200,000 a coin. So if you're buying,
it's like 2.3.
Yes,
I think it was
like
right.
2.3. It's not, and so it'd be what's called a premium.
Okay.
So you're basically paying twice the price of Bitcoin to buy a publicly traded stock that holds Bitcoin. That is not what the white paper intended. So this is where the Bitcoin maximalists, right, who are all about self-custody and individual sovereignty and the blockchain and permissionless payments, that's got nothing to do with billions of dollars in unsecured, zero-coupon convertibles being used to buy a Bitcoin, and then they get exercised when the stock hits a certain price. That's the Bitcoin capitalism mentality.
I assume if they get exercised at that price and they sell, that creates sell pressure on the NAV.
Yeah,
brings it down. If the bondholders are forced to liquidate at that price, or if they just hold the stock and benefit from it, keep going up. I don't know. I don't understand all that.
So that's why So when you have a known, like we all know, like when there's a known sale event, like Mt. Gox is going to unload $8 billion worth of Bitcoin, that puts pressure on the asset. So now you have this building pressure where now the market knows at a certain price there's going to be sellers. That will create volatility. Mm-hmm. Not to say it's going to go down, but it'll be volatile.
Yeah.
And so you've got layers and layers and layers of engineering built on top of the underlying asset, which is now being, by the way, more concentrated now than ever. Largest holder of Bitcoin, BlackRock, largest custodian, Coinbase. All these major institutions are going to become the largest holders.
Yeah.
And now you've got all this leverage coming in on top of that. The miners are doing all the leverage too. Yeah. So the next 5 years, what's going to happen to the underlying asset price when there's so much leverage built on top of it? That's got nothing to do with actually holding the actual asset itself.
A lot of volatility still, you think?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vol.
Yeah, the vol. The vol's always been high, but it seems like it's gone down over time. But
in terms of, we all know it's had 7 times. It's had more than a 50% drawdown, or maybe it's 8 times.
Yeah.
So the vol's going to be there.
It seems like the vol's been going down over time.
Of course.
With all this other new stuff being layered on.
Yeah, the ETFs, right? So if you're a pension fund and you're putting in billions of dollars into Bitcoin, you're not going to hold it for a week and then dump it. Like these are long-term holders.
Yeah,
exactly. So I think the vol, actually the beta, which is the measure of volatility compared to like a normal index like the S&P, will probably continue to go down, but also will returns.
Yeah.
Like you can't make a 2,000% return in 3 years when it's a $2 trillion asset. Like those days are probably over. Which for the
20, I mean, that's, what is it? 2 trillion times 20, that's like $40 trillion, which is.
Yeah, I know, over 10, 20 years, of course.
It's not very unrealistic.
But I mean, the last 5 years has been 1,000%. It's high. I mean, look, anything can happen, but the idea of another 1,000% 10x run in the next 5 years,
Yeah.
you're talking $1 million a coin in the next 5 years. That is astronomical.
I think Sailor's, it is, but if you think about it, it's also not. I mean, Sailor's, what is his pitch is like, his base case is like $13 million a coin by 2045 or something.
And that's certainly possible, right? Sovereigns are going to own it. You're going to have, other groups looking to literally to like buy oil. Oil is sold in dollars. People don't realize that. So much of global trade occurs in dollars, nothing to do with the U.S. If Russia's selling oil, they're doing it in dollars. But I think how the industrial complex evolves with these new instruments and all this leverage, I think we'll be very, very curious to see.
Yeah, I'm curious.
And also how the maximalists become capitalists and say, you know what, forget my why do I need to hold a freaking wallet with this godforsaken key? I'm not going to just go to my brokerage account and buy a levered MicroStrategy ETF.
I mean, I got very lucky with MicroStrategy because I was in I have accounts, IRAs, et cetera, Roths, where you couldn't buy Bitcoin. They won't allow you. The broker won't allow you to do anything. So I just slammed it all into MicroStrategy. Yeah, I liked Michael Saylor. I liked the idea of a profitable software company that wants to hold Bitcoin. And over the past couple of years, I've gotten very lucky in that sense. Where obviously it's the way what I heard Michael Saylor say recently, which I really liked, was every share over time is going to hold more Bitcoin. So even though he's printing more shares, it's
BTC yield.
You're getting BTC yield.
Every 1,000 shares is Bitcoin yield.
I like that. I'm like, there's no reason for me if I'm going to just get more Bitcoin per share over time, even if you're diluting the shares, as long as my share owns more Bitcoin over time, for me, that was that's true.
It is, but that is Bitcoin capitalism.
Yeah, I like that.
Because there are people who would say, "What the hell are you talking about? You don't own anything. You own a share of a publicly traded company. That's all you own." So they're
not wrong in a sense, but
no, they're not.
But I also own private. I also have cold wallet, hot wallet. Bitcoin. I'm mining Bitcoin. I've got Bitcoin mining stocks. I've got all these different levels of custody, right? I've got some coins on an exchange. I've diversified my risk. Every single one of those vectors has its own type of risk. Even self-custody, you got your private key, you got your seed phrase, you got your, there's a risk there. You die, something happens, you lose the seed, your house burnt, whatever it may be. Every level of custody has risk. So to me, spreading out that risk on all these different variations of holding Bitcoin is the play.
Agreed. So what's interesting is, there's a company called Supermicro Computer, right?
One of our main niches is GPU mining, which there's not many GPU miners left out there, but especially those who operate at scale. That was kind of my intro to getting into the space, was just being able to fire up a GPU and participate, plug in on just a regular gaming computer, plug into the Ethereum network is kind of where I started. By the time I had heard about Bitcoin, you had to have an ASIC, which we operate tons of those now too. But when you're at home, you can't really operate one of those things super loud. Uses a 220 volt outlet, which is what your washer or dryer uses. So the next best thing for me was, I can use a GPU. Now there's this new coin called Ethereum that's launching, this internet computer thing, and decentralized app marketplace, had all these cool bells and whistles to it. So Supermicro, Gigabyte, we use a lot of their servers and we deploy a lot of their systems, and we're just starting to try to deploy into the AI high performance compute space and kind of take the necessary steps of growth that's required because totally different requirements when it comes to mining and then providing high performance compute. So we're starting to bridge that gap. Consider maybe potentially doing a raise some capital, because as you can see, NVIDIA's stock is the best performing stock in the world, and it's $350,000 per server now if you want to get in the game.
So where I was going to go with Supermicro, and everything you said is 100% true, was it came out a couple of months ago that they've had some accounting irregularities, right? There was nothing about the underlying performance of the business. It was just, the auditor resigned. They had some accounting issues, and the stock collapsed. Even though NVIDIA on their last earnings call said they're a great customer, we're shipping tons of GPUs to them, we need them, no one cared because the market only cared about the noise. And my point being, publicly traded equities are subject to what all public equities are subject to, which is algorithmic trading, hedge funds, high frequency trading. And so at some point, the market's not going to care about the Bitcoin holdings of MicroStrategy or whoever else is going to do this strategy. They're going to have their sell targets. They're going to have RSIs that get too high. It's overheated. And so to your point, if you're going to play that game, I think you can't just play that game, right? Like that's the key is it's a lever derivative. It's like the second derivative of Bitcoin, but it's not the actual asset. And so how the maximalists and the capitalists, because again, Supermicro has an amazing company, but the stock has been crushed. What happens if something like that happens to a MicroStrategy or a Marathon who's doing these convertibles? The stock, which is essentially tied to the bond, that money is going to have to be repaid if they can't pay it back by the end of the bond term, and that's a lot of capital. They'll have to sell Bitcoin to pay back the bondholder, and so the cycle begins to wind.
Yeah.
So
you're saying the systemic risk is Bitcoin, the price of the stock doesn't go up where the bondholders can be repaid, I guess, in stock.
Yeah, I mean, if that's
the risk.
If the share price never hits the strike and it's never actually executed, then that money has to be repaid. And if there isn't cash on the balance sheet, then they're going to have to sell Bitcoin to make good on that bondholder. And when you get enough leverage, if it's not executed, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars in Bitcoin liquidation to pay creditors for publicly traded companies that have nothing to do with the actual Bitcoin supply. It's just companies it's like real estate. They're just selling off assets to cover their creditors. It's no different than any other like mall operator. So sell that mall off to pay the creditors. It's the same exact story.
It's a potential systemic
Of course. It's so people should be like aware of like it's these levered proxy second derivative plays are. You have to know what you're doing and understand what the risks are over the long term. Because like these are multi-year agreements that these companies are getting into.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Saylor knows what he's doing. He's been around for a very long time. But yeah, there's risk in anything you do. And I think he does mention this. He does say like, hey, the risk is Bitcoin goes to zero, Bitcoin goes down in price. That was what he was saying, if I remember correctly from the clip I watched. But if these bonds need to be repaid at 0%, what is it like? Is it paid in full at the end of term? Or can he use the software side of his business to continually start paying these bonds down? I mean, how does that factor in?
I'd have to look at the actual offering agreement, which
that's what I'm curious.
Is subject to like 1933 laws, literally 1933 laws. These laws were written, and so
really, wow.
That's a 100-year-old law is still in effect for these convertibles. Which means that speculation is as old as the hills. Jesse Livermore said that. One of the greatest traders of all time, early 19th century or 20th century English trader. But speculation will always be around. And so now there's my only point being is that people who are not into Bitcoin for its truths, decentralization, self-custody, self-sovereignty, a hedge against runaway monetary fiscal policy, and they're Bitcoin capitalists, it's a very different risk profile than just having the underlying asset in of itself.
Interesting. And I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. But I'm here for it. I think, Bitcoin is many different things to many different people, right?
It is. Like it's a multidimensional chameleon asset class.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite quotes is like, Bitcoin is the greatest innovation, in human history and the history of money, wrapped up as like a multi-level like Ponzi scheme.
It's a religion. It's like
so you said that before. You told me that last time we spoke. You said Bitcoin is a religion.
Yeah.
There's definitely certain aspects of it that are a religion, but then there's also some aspects that are the opposite of. Because I thought I've been laying in bed at night thinking about our conversation.
Oh, that's funny.
And my thought was, religions are like there's a lot of faith involved in a religion. And there's definitely an element of that in Bitcoin, but at the same time, there's also immutable truths like, the 21 million, hard cap, this idea of absolute scarcity, the auditability of the blockchain itself.
Sure.
How you can see transactions. So, it's like on the Ledger wallet, I think it's like Verus et Numerus, like faith and math or something like that, or something along those lines. Trust and math, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that element of certainty that these certain things about it.
Yeah.
But what do you mean when you say Bitcoin's a religion? Like, how do you think that mindset helps its adoption, hurts adoption?
Oh, I think it's contributed vastly to its explosion. It's the first. asset class in history to start from literally from like the consumer up, not Wall Street down.
I fucking love
right?
that.
I mean, think about it. Like, I mean, you go way back to like the CypherPunk guys, right? The Adam Bax and those guys who had no idea what they really had when they had it, or I guess Satoshi, really.
Well, you're on the CypherPunk podcast.
There you go. Shout out, drop,
right there, so.
Drop. So if I'm not a world religion expert, but I'll speak to my knowledge, which is like the Judeo-Christian faith, right? You look at all the core tenets that it has. Number one, it has to have, and this is true in all major religions, a sacred central text that is immutable, right? The white paper is the sacred holy text for the Bitcoin religion. There's the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Talmud. People view those who are in that religion as infallible. Everyone knows it was written by a man, and people know that men are fallible. But the idea of the document, the paper, the words, they cannot be changed. For example, there's never been since the canon was put together, the Holy Bible, it has not been updated, and it never will be. There's no 1.1 update, and there will not be one for the white paper. Nor will there be another Bitcoin blockchain unless it's forked. But like there's this immutable document, which is the key. Two is you have to have a sense of good and evil, right? Fighting against some malevolent force. That's common. Well, we know what those are. We've talked about them for 2 hours on this podcast, right? They're all line them up.
Ain't that the truth?
Three, you have to have the idea of clerics or prophets or interpreters of the text. And we've mentioned people who in the Bitcoin one follow that. We have priests of Bitcoin. We literally have clerics and rabbis and pastors of the Bitcoin philosophy. Fourth, we have symbols and tokens, right? The orange pill, the actual Bitcoin logo, which is nowhere in the white paper.
Yeah.
So crucifixes, we have these holy objects that we hold.
Yeah.
Fifth, we have communities, right? We have meetups. We have chat forums. We have these whole groups of people. We have logoing, walk around. We have conferences. We have pilgrimages to Miami and Nashville. And so you think about it that way, you're like, it really does check all the major boxes, what would qualify as a major religion. And I think that psychologically, and lastly, and probably most importantly, which isn't religion, but it sort of is it is the monetization of an ideology, which has never existed beyond like large central churches or other religions who like picked up land or, pillaged villages and stole their gold and their art and their treasures. Bitcoin is monetized ideology. That is a relatively new phenomenon. And so when you combine the religious components with the monetization and the idea of like riches, because remember, Christians believe in heaven, Hindus and Sikhs believe in all these other things. Like there is a payoff to your devotion, to your sacrifice.
Yeah.
Oh, if I just stack my sats and I dollar cost average and I buy dips, then I will get a reward. my heavenly Father on this in heaven, or great runs in a bull market. So it really does line up.
You're not wrong.
If you think about it that way.
You raised some fantastic points. I mean, it's like, I feel my reward as a priest. So like my local Bitcoin meetup where I've gotten 10, 20, 30 messages from people. Just like, Maddie, thanks so much for teaching me to dollar cost average.
Yeah, because you're evangelizing. Yeah, like you're building disciples.
Yeah, it's wild. It
is.
Really is.
All we really need now is like a Bitcoin baptism. Like, think about it. Like, you can get like a little tub in here with some orange water.
Yeah, it's like,
and we will like literally baptize people.
That's wild.
And it will be like the final Judeo-Christian box to check.
That is so wild, but it's you're not wrong. It's like you said, like you go to the Bitcoin conference every year. It's like it's like the Hajj, like for the Muslim, like from the Muslim.
Yeah,
faith.
like going to Mecca.
Like going to Mecca.
Yeah,
it's like it is that journey. That's what it feels like every year too. It's like you're there.
And our priests and our clerics get up and they evangelize us more with what we already know. Nothing new about big. By the way, what's interesting is, and what I love so much about the Bitcoin industrial complex is how people keep discovering new things about Bitcoin. Everything about Bitcoin has already been known, except its application as a capital tool, right? So now it can be used as part of the capital stack, part of a convertible note. Well, that's new. This goes back to like the idea of
there's peripheral
more
stuff
and more.
like stuff being built on top of
Sure,
Bitcoin,
like ordinals, lightning, agreed.
Rooms, like different things. People,
but who's buying Bitcoin because of ordinals or because of like the Lightning Network?
Yeah,
like that's not what's going to fuel the
unless you're in El Salvador. Yeah.
True, if you're in Haiti, I mean, you need Lightning. Otherwise, you'll get paid like 3 days later.
Yeah,
and you'll pay like you'll pay a lot of money to move $2, which is inefficient.
Things are definitely important, but yeah, no doubt about it. One thing to me that I because I gave you my base case about what wasn't like a religion, right? Where like there was all this faith and all this stuff. Whereas like you have that mathematical understanding. But the one thing that I thought of that was similar to like a religious experience or religious that is similar to religion was like Bitcoin, like the you had that initial, like in Christianity, you had the initial like Christian Catholic thing, and then Martin Luther came and was like, boom, he put this thing on the door, and it's like now you got all these subsects of Christianity. Exactly. Like in my mind, that's like when Bitcoin was formed, it was like this original thing, and then now you've got like all of the heretics, the Ethereum, and all all these different financial products. Right? Sure. So the maximalists are like these people are heretics.
Exactly.
But it's just so there is that
splintering in the church.
Yeah, it's
between maximalists and capitalists. Yeah. Right. Who want to talk about dollar-denominated Bitcoin ETF options. That's got nothing to do with the typical Bitcoin maximalist. Like that would be like the Protestant versus Catholic, argument. Yeah,
it is fascinating. I mean, I'm a Bitcoin first advocate, but I'm not a maximalist. I think there's other use cases. I don't think everything has to be about money, just money, right? Like not everything is money. Like there's all these other things. There's art, there's NFTs, like, there's metaverse and gaming, and you don't need the immutable, guarantees that Bitcoin provides, that level of decentralization for all these other fun like things that don't necessarily just have to do with like your savings account. There's a lot of different rabbit holes to go down.
Agreed.
So this has been a fantastic conversation. It's probably one of my favorites. Got to say that on air. But let me ask you some personal questions, and then we'll give it a wrap. Looking back, what's one piece of advice you'd give to your younger self, just starting out as an English major who had no idea where life was going to take him?
Man, advice is brittle. I'd say like, what's one piece of wisdom I'd want?
Dollar cost average Bitcoin.
Right? Yeah. Get in at like 09. The biggest thing that I've probably experienced in my career is very, very, very few people, if any, do exactly what's expected of them when they're hired, when they enter into a relationship, when they want to be a friend or a son or whatever. I think human nature is to always seek our highest level of comfort, which sometimes means not doing things that we don't want to do. But we are called as employees, friends, husbands, wives, children to do things that we don't want to do all the time. That is the expectation. And few of us ever actually meet it. And so I'd say to my younger self, you have to do exactly what's expected of you. And that's hard. But the more you do that, I think the better off that you would be in all areas of your life, financially, relationally, professionally, etc.
That's fantastic advice. Final question. Who's been the most influential mentor or role model in your life? And what's one lesson they taught you that still sticks with you today?
Yeah. I'd say my dad. It's easy. And the reason why is because my dad is the smartest guy that I know. My dad is never someone who made a lot of money. He spent most of his life in like lower management and like these giant companies, like working in a cubicle his whole life. But he taught me to be curious. Like when I was a kid and like we'd go on vacation, we didn't go to Disney, like nothing. We went to like Civil War barracks. He was a history major. Yeah. He wanted to be a history teacher. All he talked about was like, every year he gives me a World Almanac for Christmas, and I spend the month of January actually reading that thing, which is, like who does that? Wow. We do. I have 20 World Almanacs on my office. It's such a nerdy, but like I feel like we have lost to some degree like intellectual curiosity in this country. We do what we're told. We do what we're fed, and we don't think about things in any kind of a nuanced or multidimensional way. It's every problem can be solved with a proof in 140 characters. And it's just that's not how we are. Like human beings are too complex to resolve these nuanced issues. So by far my dad, who said like, you have to always be intellectually curious about everything at all times. And it's like, for my kids, it's the same thing. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm going to tell you to always question and understand the nuances in any issue, because the reality is no political party, no ideology has a monopoly on all good ideas that has ever existed.
No doubt.
So
no doubt.
I want them to think that, because like that's how I think too.
Oh, that's fantastic. You know, it's funny that like your answer, like my dad is also, I would say, my best friend and probably the most influential role model in my life. And the answer to your previous question was like, that was one thing that he told me that always stuck with me, which is like, you know, son, actions speak louder than words, right? Like, you know, your expectations, like follow through on what you say you're going to do, right? So that was one of the lessons he taught me that always stuck with me. I always remember that quote. And he said that, you know, his dad told him that. We were just driving down the road, and he just said, you know, when I was your age, son, my dad told me this quote, and I'm going to tell you. And you know, I tell my own son that now today. So it's funny how these ideas can flow through time and history, right? It's like a butterfly effect. Wow, this has been a phenomenal conversation, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Mark, it was fun. My pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure.